Hello again, it's me, blatantly ignoring my Patreon as usual, and deciding to make a different video from what the poll asked for. Today we're listing 6 more curiosities around the Rain World map. That makes it a unique video idea. The last time I did this was before Downpour, and I cataloged most of the Unexplained stuff. Now, Downpour focused a lot on expanding on the Unexplained stuff. Unfortunately, more or less none of it was the stuff that I was talking about in the last video, so there's basically no updates on those. So as I do, I'm going to completely ignore that fact and continue to talk about and theorize about more unexplained shit. This time in Downpour. And hey, this time I also don't even need to shill before we start, though I would still appreciate if you gave that Patreon a look despite it. Anyway, let's get a move on and start off with the Scav King and all of his weirdness. So, the Scavenger King is the boss that appears right at the end of the Artificer campaign, if you go the violence route and choose to murder all the scavengers atop 5 Pebbles can. This individual, the leader of the scavenger community in that city, has a lot of very interesting characteristics. First off, the obvious. He wears a very high quality mask that seems very similar to the reindeer skulls found at the Toll. There's also the Karma 3 painted on its head, which is a trend that's seen a lot in scavenger cities and stuff, that being their seeming knowledge of karma symbols and of old ancient society. Scavengers are weird and clearly know a lot more than most people assume, but I'll not get into that here. We're talking about one exceptionally unusual scavenger instead of all the other exceptionally unusual scavengers. The King Scav appears to have garbed itself not only in pearls and all the other shit that scavs tend to like, but also in armor. 3 plates taken from red centipedes adorn the flanks of the King Scav, protecting it from spear blows. But that was all pansy shit. Did you know that the Scav King not only has a citizen ID drone just like Artificer, but also has the mark of communication? That's right, this guy's been in cahoots with 5 Pebbles. Okay, we don't actually know if he's been in cahoots with 5 Pebbles, but it's the only real explanation for why he has those 2 things. 5 Pebbles found the scavenger at some point, was likely confused as to how it got a citizen ID drone, likely something it found outside the same way that Artificer did. 5 Pebbles then gave it the mark of communication to be able to give it the same spiel that he gave every other visitor he received and sent it on its way, only for the scavenger to take the knowledge and access granted to it and use them to ransack 5 Pebbles City for the likely insanely large amount of pearls within its buildings and walls, forming a scavenger colony so large it was capable of forging new inventions like electric spears, as well as training individuals like the elite scavs, which are barely seen anywhere else in the game. This is interesting, as it sets a nice parallel between Artificer and the King Scav, both having been set on this quest accidentally or otherwise by 5 Pebbles. It's just a real neat narrative thing, if it even is the case. We don't honestly know that much about the King Scav, but this is the only theory that I can think of that honestly makes sense, unless it was purposed by NSH specifically to troll 5 Pebbles. Anyway, next up on the list, Rivulet's Mark and Pearl. So, as you probably well know, Rivulet spawns into the campaign from a mysterious bout of explosions and drainage system with a pearl in its stomach and the mark of communication above its head. A slugcat already possessing both of these features is pretty solid evidence that it was purposed by an iterator for some job, likely given a message and given the ability to understand other iterators, and sent off to complete a mission of some sort. We see this in Hunter, too, Spearmaster being the exception with a pearl but no mark, likely just because 7 Red Suns thought it wasn't really necessary to give him the ability to understand him. The pearl inside of Rivulet's stomach is said to contain a schematic of a slightly damaged iterator superstructure, as well as a maintenance order. It could be that this was a pearl given to it by its creator, but it could also be that this pearl was just one that it found while out and about, as it doesn't really seem to be pertinent for either of the iterators it finds itself meeting with in its campaign. It could also be that this pearl is used as an explanation for the Rivulet's mission, should it need to explain itself, as it describes a detailed entry pathway into an iterator can. Perhaps it was sent to assist 5 Pebbles. Rivulet is already one of the most mysterious slugcats seen in Downpour, with origins arguably more ambiguous than Saint. Which iterator purposed it? Was it even purposed? If it wasn't, it must have gotten its mark from some iterator out there. My first guess would be Chasing Wind, easily the least explained named member of the local group. We don't even know their color palette, so it could be that they purposed Rivulet, but that's getting very near to we know nothing about them, so my theory can't be refuted territory. In reality, we know almost nothing about Rivulet's origins. It has too many unusual features to simply just be a very well-traveled slugcat, not even mentioning its weird-as-hell evolved slugcat features that far surpass the physical capabilities of any other slugcat seen besides maybe Artificer, who is a very special case and is probably powered by nothing but hatred-infused muscle milk. Anyways, next up, number 3, Saint's Climate. So, Saint, one of the most weird campaigns that I've talked semi at length about over the course of my channel, but his weird void lore isn't exactly what we're speaking on today. One of the main things I've stated multiple times throughout my videos is that Saint's campaign takes place during an ice age, but that's not entirely true. While Saint does take place during a colder era, one where the world is constantly blanketed in snow, it likely isn't due to the natural shifting of climates over time. It's more likely due to the lack of functional iterators. At the very end of the Saint campaign, we see tens of collapsed iterator cans stretching off into the distance. This is a theory I've heard multiple times before, so I'm not going to pretend that I'm the first person to think of this, but what if the lack of functional iterators actually caused the climate shift? We know that iterators produce a boatload of heat due to the amount of coolant they need and steam they produce, so what if this sudden lack of that heat caused the global temperature to drop substantially? There's also the possibility that the Five Pebbles and Moon group is just much closer to the poles than otherwise suggested, and it would have just been naturally colder and covered in snow there if not for the iterators heating all this shit up. The lack of iterators also suggests that Saint has either been busy, or that this truly does take place long enough later that the iterators would naturally collapse like that. Now, this wouldn't really be an issue if we actually knew how long a cycle was, because I could just put an arbitrary number there and not have to use human terms like years, but I guess that's the nature of time and space kind of being fucked up by the void and all that nonsense. I don't know, I'm just kind of peeved about not having a set way to determine time in this game. Alright, we're halfway done. We're making great time. Anyway, next up, Inspectors and Daddy Longlegs. One of the new creatures introduced in Downpour was the Inspector. Most of us have seen them, the weird squiggly dudes in Five Pebbles and Moon. Their main duty, as described in my video on the flora and fauna of this game, is to remove threats to the interior ecosystem of the iterator. But there's an interesting thing about them, specifically found in Five Pebbles Can. Inspectors look a lot like Daddy Longlegs, and while it's not exactly one-to-one, you can see the familiarities. This is a more game theory inclusion to the list than most others, but hey, hear me out. What if at the very least the mother Longlegs were born from rot overtaking an Inspector? Or at least the rot managed to learn how to move around by copying the way Inspectors do it. First off, the similarities between the two extend far past just the visuals, as Inspectors not only utilize the same creature template as Daddy Longlegs, they also share spawn points with them, with Daddy Longlegs taking the spawn points of Inspectors as the rot progresses throughout the timeline. We don't know how smart the rot is, whether or not it's a hive mind that can intake new information, or if it's just a brainless consume-everything bacterial colony, but I don't think it's too far off to assume that the first Inspector consumed may have been the basis for the first mobile rot cyst. Inspectors in general are really mysterious. They were one of the very few things that was just slapped into the game almost in a retcon way, where they just didn't exist beforehand and they're actually really lore important. So it's kind of weird to just suddenly have this piece of iterator infrastructure that wasn't revealed to us before Downpour suddenly exist, and we just have to kind of deal with it. Next up, number 5, shelters and living buildings. So you may have caught me talking about how, in Rainworld, even buildings are alive, which might seem like it came out of left field for those less versed in weird trivia as I. But you may have also noticed something about this in-game as well. When a shelter failure occurs, how does the shelter return to working order so fast? Even more questionable, how have the buildings lasted so long against all the constant range and explosions? There aren't any maintenance workers there to make sure the structural integrity remains stable. Well, the answer to this minor lore quandary comes in a Downpour Pearl, specifically Moon's dialogue on the pale pink outskirts Pearl. I'll just read out what she says. It's an asset management log, blah, 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 blah. Let's just skip to the part that matters. Most of the machinery, storage areas, and other structural housings need to remain watertight. This is due to the fluctuating groundwater and regular bombardment of heavy water vapor from our breathing. No matter how well constructed the architecture may be, deterioration is an inevitability. To counter this, there is a second line of defense. Microbes are infused into the building materials that lie dormant for an indefinite period of time. They are awakened in response to splintering and separations, initiating a healing cycle that gradually fills in the damage and restores waterproofing to the structure. The duration of this process depends on the extent of the damage, of course. And the rest of the Pearl doesn't matter. Actual Downpour Pearl reading video coming fucking eventually, dude, I don't know. The Pearl tells us that the structures that we rest in, as well as most of the machinery we see on the surface, even the structural components of the buildings, are all infused with microbe colonies. A microbe colony that constantly repairs all damage it is capable of fixing. This is how shelters can repair themselves, stopping any failures from existing forever. This doesn't really say much about the lore, but I mean, it's neat. Anyway, let's get to the real theorization shit now. Oh yeah, number 6, weirdness around Moon's superstructure. Yeah, we're ending off with a juicy one today. Moon's superstructure is filled with lots of shit to talk about, so let's start out with the most obvious one. First off, you can see multiple rooms in submerged superstructure in their functional state in Spearmaster Looks to the Moon. Now, some things that you can't see going from functional moon to collapsed moon are her functional heart. This big fucking room doesn't show up in submerged, her city is obscured by lore-hiding fog post-collapse, coward mood there. Oh yeah, her city. Moon's city is interesting to look at, primarily because of how it compares to Five Pebbles City. I've similarly expanded on this in my lore video, but I feel like a deeper dive here would be worthwhile. First off, the most notable thing to see, Five Pebbles City is bigger and more uniform, filled with more of these skyscraper-esque buildings we theorized about last video, whereas Moon City is sparser and has smaller buildings as well as several of these strange spherical modules around the area, looking more like a factory city than a primarily residential one. This shows us a couple of things, primarily the fact that Five Pebbles had a lot more residents, likely because he was strictly built with habitation in mind as one of the later generation iterators. Moon, on the other hand, was likely constructed with industry in mind, as her systems would likely allow her to watch over the factories atop her superstructure. We know that a sky bridge was constructed to connect the two cans, that's what the precipice is. So it could be that Moon was used as a more factory and processing city, and then the goods were exported to Five Pebbles City when they were complete. Though maybe I'm wrong, and Moon was just the shittier neighborhood, so had less residents despite being a solid 30-minute walk away. Anyways, to end this segment and video off, we have another juicy topic, Moon's slideshow, technically a weird thing around her superstructure. Now, when I say slideshow, I mean more accurately the graphics that she puts up after being fixed at the end of Rivulets' campaign. First off, the obvious. The Overseers are constantly pinging her with random shit like this picture of the moon that I'm sure Iggy is very proud of. In Saint, they ping her with all sorts of shit involving scary creatures and images of her dead cat. Okay. But the most notable one that I want to talk about is the fact they're pinging her with this display, which I'm unsure about, but I have a theory. The colors of both the blocks here and the placement on a board suggests, and I love this theory so much, that Five Pebbles and Moon are playing board games together. Just hanging out playing supercomputer dominoes until they disintegrate. Okay, but that's baby shit. Let's talk about the big juicy ones. Ooh, yeah. Oh yeah, look at that. This bad boy can fit so much nonsensical shit in it. Well, actually, I have a much more concrete theory on this mess than I did with Five Pebbles mess. First off, these 5 nodes connected by what look to be nerves or veins or roots of some kind. Now, I could be wrong, but I have a theory that these are the heart room nodes, those 4 gravity generators and the mass rarefaction cell in the center, all confusingly marked with karma symbols. Beneath each of the gravity generators, there is a wheel of symbols, 7 ancient letters meaning a number of things, including Dragon Slayer, Wanderer, and those are the only 2 we know. These are just ancient letters likely designed to be downright untranslatable, so I'll not really bother. The wheel surrounds a Karma 10 symbol, and all 4 of these wheels are the same except they're mirrored. The lines that spider across the top and bottom are also pretty nonsensical, but we can see what looks like remnants of decayed or just low-resolution writing that has been similarly flipped to fit all 4 corners. Now, it's likely that this symbol is a display for the power grid that Moon now has access to, as her heart is suddenly back online. Why they choose to make it look so weird and organic, I'm not sure, but the roots do make it a lot more intimidating than it otherwise would be. Still not as bad as whatever the fuck Five Pebbles has going on, though. Alright, 2 more things, and we're done. These 2 similar-looking graphics seem to display data screens that Moon is looking through, as they coincide with her remembering things and looking up things respectively. The first of these 2 appears as she begins to talk about slag reset keys in Hunter, and seems to showcase the green neuron filled with slag reset keys as well as Hunter. Though it also shows some ancient writing. This jumbled QR code looking thing, as well as some actually unreadable dialogue, and these weird karma symbols at the top. The second one has these too, but instead of Hunter and a green neuron, it has this weird yellow symbol and the icon for the mass rarefaction cell. I'm not sure what this icon is, but it seems similar to the ones on the right in general aesthetic similarities. The karma symbols remain the same too. It could be that they're a way of keeping time or some other form of consistent information not dependent on the context of the files. I'm unsure, but that brings us up to speed on what Moon showcases. Wait, actually, sorry, I just got an invoice. What do you mean there's more? Well, when Spearmaster goes to hang out with Moon, she puts up a bunch of interesting things. First off, the same heart thing that we found before. Well, I guess that rules out the idea that it's a new datasheet taken from heart reactivation. It could honestly just be a power grid diagnosis sheet and they didn't want to make it look different, so I don't have to change my theory that much. Then there's this, which doesn't tell us much, but it's likely just Moon diagnosing that Spearmaster is a slugcat, as the slugcat is highlighted. So it could be that Moon is looking into her database of weird goobers to see which one this is. And the last one is her checking out how weird Spearmaster's anatomy is and checking out where his pearl is. Oh yeah, and then there's these. I don't really know when they show up, but they're in the files for the Downpour projections next to the Moon ones, so I'm gonna guess that that's the case, so I'm just gonna cover them despite it. This one looks like Five Pebbles mishmash, but even more fucked up. The wheel is still kinda there, but the strange highlighted blocks are all jumbled around and their borders are kind of fucking destroyed. So my guess is that this is some sort of data collection or perhaps a map of the iterator internals, which has been fucked because it's Moon and her can's fucked. The second one is downright completely incomprehensible, though we do know what this symbol in the center is. It's the symbol for the friend passage. So, my headcanon, because that's all we can do about this image, is that this is some visualization of Moon's local group or something. A friends list, one might say. Now, that's all I have. None of the symbols here tell us much, so, fun. Anyway, that's actually all the Moon stuff we have to look at for now. I don't really have an idea for an outro, so thanks for watching. Give me money on Patreon, please. I promise it's a worthwhile investment if you want to mildly push me towards certain video topics, or if you want slight log spoilers, I guess. Anyways, that's all from me. Bye-bye.